Underwriting for the Money Doctor Show is provided by Ruggeri Real Estate, Federal Street, Greenfield, a third-generation real estate agency serving the Pioneer Valley. Ryan and Casey Liquors, Main Street, Greenfield, exploring the world one glass at a time. West County Equipment Rental of Shelburne, daily, weekly, monthly rentals, 625-6463, or on the web at westcountyequipment.com. The Franklin County Community Development Corporation, growing sustainable businesses and communities since 1979. www.fccdc.org. Weld Communications, Marketing and Publicity, helping businesses spread the word in the Pioneer Valley and beyond. www.weldwords.com.
There's a better life if I could be debt-free, but all my money is a mystery. I was feeling overwhelmed and it was wearing thin when I knocked on the door and heard the doctor's in. Oh, the doctor's in, the doctor's in. She got the right prescription to help you win. Oh, the doctor's in, the money doctor's in.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rahaim, and welcome to the Money Doctor Show. I'm the president of Power Down Debt, and today my guest is Joe Ruggeri from Ruggeri Real Estate. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Joe Ruggeri is third-generation real estate broker and the owner-broker of Ruggeri Real Estate.
Yes, I've settled my ground in Western Mass and have enjoyed living here and working here and being surrounded in this community.
Well, we like having you.
Thank you.
So interestingly enough, folks out there might think that I've asked you on to talk about real estate, but really, what I'm wondering is, do you suppose there are people out there who have wanted to buy a house and have been not knowing how to do it without, or have been emotionally detained by the thought of a 30-year mortgage? Or maybe they've wanted to sell a house and they immediately think about the cash they're going to have from the house and what that will have to be spent on.
Certainly, both sides of the story are interesting. The buyer's side, folks are making a large commitment and they're wondering, you know, they might be in their 20s wondering, what am I going to do over the next 30 years of my life? Is this really what I should be doing?
Sure.
Is this going to hold me back? Am I going to be able to relocate? And I think, yeah, that does go into people's minds.
Right. It's a huge decision. And I'm here really, I brought you on board because we've been talking about this off camera. I brought you on board to talk about the idea that there's another way to do this. You could actually buy a house with a 30-year mortgage and have it paid off in 8 years or 10 years without sending extra money, which is a really unthinkable thing. At least it was to me until about 5.5 years ago.
Right.
And the idea from your perspective as a real estate broker, to be able to not necessarily explain that to someone, but just bring them the idea, the concept, that while you're looking at this house with a 30-year mortgage looming over your head, and you're afraid to pull the trigger, wouldn't it feel different emotionally if pulling that trigger meant that you took a 30-year loan with the nice low payments that you could hopefully afford, but you only paid for it for about 8 to 10 years?
I think coupling that with the fact that maybe a lot of these folks are coming out of college with college debt.
Right.
They probably have some credit card debt.
Sure.
And then they're going to add on a 30-year mortgage. It's a lot to handle.
Right. It is a lot to handle. And when you think about the way that banks, and of course, you know, we're all a fan of banks, they give us the money, right?
Sure.
But the way that banks decide whether you can afford that mortgage or not is to take sort of a snapshot of your finances at that moment. And they use this debt to income ratio. Sounds very fancy, of about 36% usually. And so they look at the amount of income that you have in relation to the debt that you owe, and they decide if a mortgage can fit in there. Now, my side of the worry here is that you may look great on paper at that point and your mortgage fits in there, but now you've got a mortgage. And now you go down the road and you pick up a car loan, maybe some credit cards, maybe you have some babies, like Joe and Taffy just had. And so now you're adding debt on, and really you were almost maxed out with that mortgage alone. And that's when the trouble starts, I think.
Yeah.
So maybe you have a story. You have a pile of them.
I'm glad you mentioned my wife Taffy, and we did recently have a baby, and of course we've got our 30-year mortgage looming over our heads, among other credit card debt and maybe some past student loans, and
Sure.
and it is a situation that you stay up in bed at night thinking to yourself, how are we going to handle this?
Right.
What if something comes up? What if a car breaks
Sure.
down? And I think having an overall picture and an overall game plan just helps you sleep better at night.
I think it does. That's not to say, I really want to clarify this. Most people who learn about my business think that you only call me when you're in trouble, when you really can't pay your debt.
Yeah.
And truly, that's not usually my client. Although I help those people, most of my clients are folks like you. They're self-employed. They may be affluent. They have sporadic income. They're one person runs a business, the other person has a job. They've got a pile of debt that they're able to pay on. They're doing it fine, but they're thinkers. They start to think about maybe there's a better way to manage this. And that's the sort of thing that we're talking about. Now, in terms of paying off a 30-year mortgage in 8 or 10 years, without sending extra money, that sounds too good to be true. And
and that's true. And you do see a lot of TV commercials and so on and so forth. But, you know, my wife and I, we had thought about looking at the big picture for many years, and we procrastinated it. And we thought, well, our lifestyle is different. Some of our goals are different.
Right.
We want to grow our houses, and we want to have more houses, and we want to do all these things. So our situation might be different. And we procrastinated trying to look at the bigger picture. And finally, we just stopped one day and said, let's try this thing. It's nice. You're a local person. You're certainly trustworthy. You have a lot of history with you. And, you know, it was a no-brainer once we got the process rolling.
Well, thank you. What's interesting about that is you're looking to advance your business. That usually means taking on more debt.
Exactly.
Most people think that if they're going to talk to a financial advisor about getting out of debt, it means they have to freeze their picture where it is, and they cannot grow. They can't take on debt. And that's true of a lot of organizations, but in our case, I do a lot of small business coaching, a lot of real estate work, and in our case, it really is about just managing that properly and moving forward.
Well, you bring up a good point, because when 2 or 3 years ago, when you did suggest this to us,
was it that long ago, really?
I think it might have been. So I'm sorry it took that long. But,
okay.
you know, Taffy and I would say, well, we want to buy additional multifamilies. We do want to do a house flip or two.
Right.
You know, my overall experience, or my overall goal, is to have these experiences.
Yes.
You know, I don't necessarily want to be a professional house flipper, but I wanted to try it once or twice.
Sure.
I'm on my 3rd one now.
How's it feel?
It's great when the sale happens.
Right.
In the middle of it, it's sort of a stressful situation.
Sure.
And it's all part of the big experience.
Right.
And, you know, we thought, well, how can we control our debt if we're going to be incurring more?
Right.
But I think it's about seeing the big picture, taking the overall snapshot, and
daring to look at it, right?
Exactly.
It's hard to look at it.
It is hard to look at it.
I mean, I had to do it myself 5 years ago. You know, it's really hard to look at that, and it's a little depressing sometimes to see all those numbers on paper.
Sure.
But what's on the other side is probably worth it.
Well, not only that, though, I think not knowing that there might be a solution is the most stressful thing, in my opinion. Knowing that you have this debt, knowing that you could be in this for the long haul, is very stressful, the unknown.
Right.
But knowing that there might be a plan, and then knowing that the plan might cut years off of your debt, that to me is the ultimate caveat in this whole thing.
You know, you come from 3 generations of real estate brokers.
I do.
And there was a time when folks lived in their parents' basements and saved $5,000 and bought a house cash.
Sure.
And you simply didn't do it if you couldn't do that.
Right.
And today, that is not very possible for most people. Most people have to, they must take on a mortgage.
Sure.
And so there has to be a myriad of things that have changed since your grandfather's day. But what would you say is, emotionally, for people buying a house, what do you think today is so much different than it might have been then, or do you think it's really similar?
I think my generation have always been empowered with debt. My experience, even at UMass Amherst,
enamored with debt, like they love to get it, or
we've been introduced to it.
Ah, right.
It's been the solution.
Right.
You know, even as a UMass student, there were free T-shirts for credit cards.
I was just going to say that.
Excellent. Right. Not only do I get a free T-shirt, but I can go use my credit card for up to $2,000.
Right.
Fun.
Exactly.
You know, car loans. Why get a used car you can pay for? Get something nice and fancy with air conditioning, especially on these hot days. So I think we were introduced to debt. My generation was introduced to live with debt. And so debt is a comfortable thing for my generation. Going out and buying a house, getting student loans, getting a car. It's easy to sign on the dotted line. Then you start to settle in that you have all these things. You have these payments that are needed. And what's the game plan?
Well, and you've not only experienced this personally, but you see it at closings with clients. You get to a closing table, the mortgage documents are finally prepared, the lawyers are there, everybody's nervous, and you've paid $150,000 for a home, and as you're signing the mortgage, you notice that you will repay
$350,000.
Exactly, fill in the blank, $350,000, $450,000.
Sure.
When you see that, have you experienced people's
Absolutely.
reactions?
Every closing.
And what do they do?
They right then and there start spinning their wheels. How can I pay this down quicker? If the principal's $150,000 and the overall payment's $350,000, where's the $200,000 worth of interest going to? How can I eliminate that?
My experience has been they can't face it. You just look at it, it's just so ominous. You look at it and you say, okay, I'm paying $150,000 for this house, and you look at the line that says you'll repay $450,000 and you laugh and you go, right, I'm in debt beyond my wildest dreams.
Well, that's when you've got a stack of like probably 50, 60 documents you need to sign and initial, and you just tell the client, just sign it and move on.
Right, and you do just move on, you don't think about that.
Correct.
Now, when you can chop a 30-year mortgage down to 8 or 9 years, now this is without biweekly payments. Biweekly payments will knock a few years off your mortgage, but using all of your other debt, which is what you and I and Taffy are talking about, using all of your other pieces of debt to your advantage and using it to get your mortgage paid off in 8 or 9 years means you save $100,000, $200,000, a lot of money on this.
Sure is.
That means that you make your decisions going forward in a different way. For instance, right now you're looking at, I want to buy more properties. And if you can do that, and while you're paying off one mortgage more quickly, tell me about what goes on in your mind there. Is that different once you discover that than it is before?
Not only does it pay down the mortgages quicker, but it also builds more equity in my properties. So therefore, I can use that equity in that property to go on and buy something else. And that's where the growth happens in my mind. So it incurs more debt, but then using other debt to pay off things quicker, like you've mentioned, just helps to see that there might be a silver lining at the end of this tunnel here.
Right. And for people that, sorry to interrupt
No,
you.
you're
for
fine.
people that don't know about flipping houses and leveraging, which can be very dangerous and be done very badly or well, let's suppose that those houses are, the houses that you're buying are also bringing in rent, so you're getting income from them while you're managing this. Just tell me really briefly what you mean by you can use the equity in one house to buy another, and what your plan might be there and how that affects your overall lifestyle.
Like you mentioned, you buy a house for $150,000. There's this huge end of the year payment or end of the 30-year payment. You know, as you work hard and pay down that principal, the value of the house either remains the same. Of course, in the market we've had as of late, maybe it has decreased somewhat, but we're in a world where things increase in value. And eventually, the value of that house will remain the same or increase. And the idea of using the equity for what you owe based on what the house is valued at can be a great way to leverage funds to buy additional properties. Now, obviously, it stretches out your budget and makes for sleepless nights. But I think if you have a plan, an overall idea as to what you're trying to do, and a backup to know that you've got your other debts, your student loans, your credit cards. There's a plan to pay off these things and to continue the in and out process. I believe it makes the process easier to deal with, and it gives you some stability.
So you're able to make a plan to buy other homes or spend other monies, but because you've got an overall plan to manage it, you sleep at night. You feel okay. All right.
It's about the game plan.
So far we've been talking about how to buy properties. When we return, we're going to talk a little bit about how to sell a property well and what to do with the cash once you've sold the property.
Underwriting for the Money Doctor Show is provided by Ruggeri Real Estate, Federal Street, Greenfield, a third-generation real estate agency serving the Pioneer Valley. Ryan and Casey Liquors, Main Street, Greenfield, exploring the world one glass at a time. West County Equipment Rental of Shelburne, daily, weekly, monthly rentals. 625-6463 or on the web at westcountyequipment.com. The Franklin County Community Development Corporation, growing sustainable businesses and communities since 1979. www.fccdc.org. Weld Communications, Marketing and Publicity, helping businesses spread the word in the Pioneer Valley and beyond. www.weldwords.com.
Welcome back to The Money Doctor. I'm Dr. Rahaim, and my guest here is Joe Ruggeri from Ruggeri Real Estate. Welcome back, Joe.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming again, doing the show with me. It's always fun to chat with you.
I agree.
We spent the first half of the show talking about how to buy properties. It would be completely incomplete if I didn't talk about how to sell properties and what to do when you sell properties.
For every buyer, there's a seller.
There is. Now, before we get into the details about what to do with the money after you've sold your property, because you may have a windfall of cash, and there are some interesting things you could do with it that might be different than you'd expect we'd be talking about.
Sure.
Clients always come into me with some sort of analogy, not always, but often, and they're very interesting, and I've begun to sort of log them. And when I was preparing our show today, there was a woman who came in at noontime. She was my noontime appointment. She sat in the chair, and I thought, I wonder what analogy I'm going to use for this real estate show. And she sat down and said, so, I've sold my house. Those were her opening words. And I asked, could I use her name? She said I could, and her name was Kathleen Meyer, and I'm going to credit her with this analogy. I said, Kathleen, tell me, if you can, having just gone through this process. And she said it was long and arduous and very, very stressful. I said, what was that like for you? Give me an analogy. And she thought about it for just a split second, and this is what she came up with. You know, selling a house is a lot like a Thanksgiving dinner. It's like preparing a Thanksgiving meal. Now, I did the same thing you did. I laughed. I thought, I can't wait to hear this. She said, you know, you spend all of this time preparing it. You talk to the attorneys, you talk to your neighbors. I called my sister, she said, you know, what am I going to do with this? You plan, you pack boxes, you do all of this. And then in 5 minutes at the closing table, it's all over. She said, and you breathe a sigh of relief.
Then it's nap time.
Yeah, then it's nap time, exactly. That's what she said, you breathe a sigh of relief. But she said, I just wanted people to linger. She said, I felt like saying to them, can't you just linger here a little longer? I spent a lot of time preparing this.
Sure.
And she said, then it's all over, and you have this new sense of normal, and now what do you do? And of course, the point is, now what do? You have to decide what you're going to do with that money. If you have some profit from that house. Now, what I find most common is that people have decided what they're going to do with that money long before it's ever in their hand. They've pre-spent it.
Sure.
And so I wanted to talk to you today about the mindset of people selling houses, yourself included maybe,
sure.
and a possible different way to look at that might be very powerful for people.
If I could use the analogy of Thanksgiving dinner.
Sure.
You know, there's a lot of prep work that goes into a meal. And I believe if you're going to get your highest and best Thanksgiving meal, like you're trying to get your highest and best value for your home,
right.
There's a little bit of prep work that I suggest people to do.
Yes.
And you know, that might entail cleaning up all the tchotchkes around the house, maybe taking down some photos. If you had always planned on cleaning out your attic or your basement, well, maybe before you sell your house, that's the time to do it.
You bet.
You know, if people have to walk through your house like it's a maze, it doesn't show well.
It might even look terrific to you, and your friends and family might think you're a fabulous decorator, but what you're trying to show people, in my opinion, is a blank palette. You want people to come in who might not have a lot of imagination and see this house as if it could be their own.
Absolutely.
So take down a lot of the personal items like that. Make it clean. Make your rooms look big and neat. All of that can be done, I love this part, of course, for no money. No money. I love free, right?
Yeah.
Now, there are things that we recommend, or that you recommend that people do that they spend a little bit of money on, and I know you and I will have lots to say about this, but there are things that I recommend people don't do. For instance, I say don't spend a lot of money redoing your kitchen and your bathroom, even though that's where a lot of dollars come in the sale price, if you don't know that you can recoup those costs on the market.
Sure.
And if you do it, you know, the next person that comes through, you might have loved a yellow ceramic tile floor. You might have hired a decorator and it could be terrific. But the buyer that comes in might not want it. And you've wasted the money.
The other thought, though, Fran, also is if the yellow ceramic is not something that looks right, there might be a way to paint around it.
That's right.
Or maybe buy a few extra fixtures.
Right.
Kitchens, for example.
Exactly.
You know, maybe you don't need to rip down all your cabinets. Paint them all white.
Yes.
There's a lot of ways that can be done. Just recently, I had a family selling their house in Montague, and Montague is known for dry basements. So I walked through the place. It was full of mess. I said, get all this stuff out of there. I came down and I said, well, why don't you spend a day painting all your walls white and your basement floor gray?
Great advice.
Cost about $800.
Right.
He hired some people to help him do that. And it made a whole nother level on the house.
Oh, you bet.
It was excellent.
It was clean and neat and a place where people would want to store things or maybe finish off and live there.
Right.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of options, there's a lot of suggestions, a lot of ideas. But again, it's like the Thanksgiving. You know, you get your table out, you clean it first, you put the tablecloth on. There's preparation that goes into it.
Right.
And I think preparing for a sale will get the highest and best use for your dollars.
You get your just desserts,
now,
if I can use that bad
exactly.
Oh, my goodness.
Now, like you said, spending $20,000 on a kitchen,
right.
$10,000 each on a bathroom, redoing your floors,
right.
repainting, putting in all new windows. I mean, there's going to be a point where these dollars make sense, but there's be a point where you're overspending what you owe. Another thing, too, to keep in mind, if you live in a place maybe with private sewer,
right.
having somebody come and do a sewer test might be a suggestion.
Right. I was just going to say that same thing, Joe, is that while you're busy spending all your money repairing your house and getting it ready to go on the market, pay attention to curb appeal outside is a big deal. Just clean it up, make it look neat. It doesn't have to be new bushes. It just needs to look neat and well trimmed. But be prepared because you could have some surprise. And it could be in a place with private sewer that your septic system doesn't pass the inspection.
It could be in your title.
It could be in your title.
It doesn't hurt to talk to somebody in regards to your title to make sure you have full legal ownership.
Right. I mean, you could have any sort of problem that could result at the last hour in some legal expenses or some contracting expenses. So you need to look at this like a flexible, fluid thing. You know, you think you're going to ask X amount of dollars for the house. Now let's go through that first of all.
Sure.
I'm an individual. I decide I'm going to sell my house. I call a real estate agent. The real estate agent comes to my home. They do a comparative analysis with some other homes that have sold within the last 6 months, and they decide roughly, and they decide what my house might be worth. And they tell me, we think your house is worth this amount of money. I may get 2 or 3 opinions about that. I finally hire a real estate agent. I put it on the market, and lo and behold, a buyer comes and offers us, let's say, an asking price of $200,000. We get a lovely full-priced offer for $200,000. Now the fun begins, right?
Yes.
Now, well, tell me, what's the next step that happens?
Well, obviously, when the buyer and seller do sign a contract, that sort of puts into motion the financing aspect and the inspection aspect.
Right.
A buyer has the right to inspect the property. The buyer would hire an inspector of some sort or have a family member go and look at the place and make sure that the house is in full working order. There's always a period after the inspection where there might be some negotiations. There might not be. It depends on what both parties decide to do. But that's really when the contracts are signed, the financing comes into place.
Right.
And the lender, if it is indeed through a lender, hires an appraiser to go out and determine if it indeed is worth what the market value is.
Right.
What's interesting to talk to people about is the 3 values of a property. There's the assessed value, the value that the town has deemed necessary to tax the house on.
Right.
There's the market value, the value that the buyer and seller agree on. And then there's the appraised value.
Right.
The value that a professional appraiser deems the value to be financeable of.
Sure.
You would think all 3 of these values would be the same, but they all have different purpose.
Right.
And therefore, the world we live in, things are never consistent.
Right, and they all matter to someone different.
Exactly.
The town does not care what your private appraisal was, and your bank does not care what your assessment was. But the end result is if you've gone for a mortgage, that appraisal is going to matter.
Yeah.
That's going to tell the bank what the property is worth according to the professional opinion, and the bank is going to lend that amount or less usually. So unless people have some cash to bring to the table, if you've had a buyer come and offer $200,000 for a property, but the appraisal comes in at $185,000, you're back to the negotiating table.
Exactly.
Right.
It's a tough place to be.
And you know this firsthand from flipping houses and all of this. You can have some real surprises at the end. It's not a fun place to be, but once you get it all said and done, now what you have is maybe some cash that you can use for something else. Okay.
Right.
So the things that I see people do with cash from a sale is that they do
vacation.
They vacation, they spend it on debt. They may do a number of things. They may put it into the next home.
Sure.
But one way or another, they probably have sat with pen and paper or stayed up at night and had the fun part about thinking, what do we do with this extra money? Right?
Right.
So tell me, if you can, a little bit about what's going through your head when you're selling a house. In the world of flipping homes, you're planning on using it for something else, right?
Well, yes, exactly. There's always an end number that you sell for, and a lot of folks, like you said, do use that money to go into the next house. Other folks have a surplus. Maybe they're in their retirement stage, and they plan to relocate 6 months plus a day in a place like Florida or Arizona, something like that. But it's certainly a game plan to have. I would like to put a little plug in for taxes. I believe that's
taxes. A little plug for taxes.
I think taxes are a very important thing to keep in mind.
They are, and people tend to forget that. They forget taxes, insurances, costs of moving. So what I really wanted to say about all of that, Joe, is that we're conditioned to have a knee-jerk reaction to this. We work and work and work like the Thanksgiving dinner towards the end result. And when we finally have the dessert table, we eat it all in 5 minutes and then we take a nap. So that pile of money that we get, whether it's large or small, but that windfall that we get from selling a house, if you just can back up for a minute and make this decision calmly and contact a professional and find out, make a plan where you're not looking at that one item and just doing things the same way you used to do them, which is just hurry up and spend the money and move on to the next thing.
Sure.
You might actually, it's like winning the lottery a little bit. You might actually have one good shot at getting this money to work for you. And that's probably worth getting some advice. And
I
so
think that's a great idea.
You can ask
another option
like
people do is they do put it in savings, the rainy day fund.
They do put it in savings for a while usually.
Right. But certainly it's something to consider. Is the rainy day fund a healthy idea when there's other debt incurred that's eating away?
Well, I think
so it's a game plan. It's the overall picture.
It's
talking to a professional, seeing what your options are, and then making an educated decision.
Right, and I think in just wrapping this up, the idea that you might want to think a little bit outside the box when you've got such a big decision as buying or selling your home at hand, and get some outside professional help is really, really worthwhile, and something that people should maybe take a second thought about. I know it's hard when you're in the middle of all that because it's a very arduous task, but take another look at it and maybe contact a professional.
For me to wrap up, I will say things are different than when my grandfather sold real estate. Certainly different than when my father's generation sold real estate. I believe there's more specialized educations nowadays. When you go to colleges, there's probably 30 different degrees you can choose from, probably more.
Right.
So I do want to reiterate on the fact that talking to a professional about certain things and talking to different professionals about different things that they focus in really gives the consumer the best options for their dollars.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, Joe, for coming and doing this.
My pleasure.
If you have any other questions for Joe Ruggeri, you can find him at Ruggeri Real Estate, or you can always contact us at powerdowndebt.com. And until our next chat, stay positive.
There's a better life if I could be debt-free, but all my money is a mystery. I was feeling overwhelmed and it was wearing thin when I knocked on the door and heard the doctor's in. Oh, the doctor's in, the doctor's in. She got the right prescription to help you win. Oh, the doctor's in, the money doctor's in.